Hello, High Rock. Welcome to our daily devotional. We're continuing today with the letter of First Peter, and we are in chapter 2. But just as a reminder for context, this is a section of Peter's letter that deals with various types of human relationships and how we should treat one another. But it is all predicated on that insight from yesterday's devotional where Peter reminds us that we are temporary residents. We are aliens. This is not our home. It's a temporary place. We're moving on to a much better place. And so because it is a temporary place, we should be willing to live in such a way that we're not trying to make this our home. We're willing to endure some things that we might not otherwise endure because there is a higher purpose in it all, similar to being missionary. So with that context, we are in 1 Peter chapter 2, verses 18 through 20, where we read this. Or Michael, if you'd read for us.
Hear the word of the Lord. You who are slaves must submit to your masters with all respect. Do what they tell you, not only if they are kind and reasonable, but even if they are cruel. For God is pleased when, conscious of his will, you patiently endure unjust treatment. Of course, you get no credit for being patient if you are beaten for doing wrong. But if you suffer for doing good and endure it patiently, God is pleased with you. This is the word of the Lord.
Thanks be to God. Well, this is a hard passage, similar to certain passages in Titus or Ephesians or in Timothy. It's a subject that New Testament writers had to regularly address. And part of the reason is because there were an incredible number of slaves in the Roman Empire. In the city of Rome itself, it was estimated that there were more than half the people were slaves. In fact, there was actually a law that you could not dress your slave in any type of clothes that would identify them as a slave. And the reason why was because they were afraid that if slaves were visibly identified when they went out doing their master's business, they would see each other and they would realize the numbers that they had, and this would promote a rebellion. And so it was against the law to dress your slave in any way that was identifiable. And in fact, there had been a number of slave rebellions, and they were terrible and bloody, and they always failed miserably. And so it was just, in the context of Rome's empire, it was just an unreasonable expectation to think that you could win your freedom. It wasn't like there was somewhere you could run to. Rome was, for them, the known world. And anywhere you ran to, you would be returned for a reward, and the punishment would be terribly severe. In addition to that, as far as the church goes, the church had to operate within the world. There were certain rules for Rome tolerating people. Rome was fairly tolerant as empires go, ancient empires go. But there are a couple of things that Rome would not tolerate. One of them would be if you failed to pay taxes. That is something Rome would never tolerate. And another thing was if you tried to disrupt the family order. And in their family order, the pater potestas, the pater familias, the father who ran the family, it was extremely patriarchal, had all the rights and everyone else had none, literally. And so they could decide everyone's fate. And if you disrupted that by telling wives to not obey their husbands, or children not to obey their parents, or slaves not to obey their masters, that would be the end of you. So those were the things that Rome would not tolerate. So what is Peter and Paul and what are they to do in a situation like this? Well, if we pull these statements into a modern context, they can be easily misused, like many people did, to justify slavery. Say, see, Paul was justifying slavery. Look, Peter here is telling slaves to obey their masters. Yes, in a context where they literally could do nothing to change it. Now, sometimes household slaves could earn enough. Slavery was always bad. It wasn't as bad as American slavery was. American slavery was one of the worst forms of slavery, period. Slaves actually had some rights. They could own property. You couldn't separate their families, generally speaking. They could even purchase their freedom. So it's a little bit different. Still, terribly undignified situation. Don't want to justify it in any way. But Peter, similar to Paul, Peter is actually giving people who many people would think don't have a choice, and he's giving them the dignity of a choice, saying, look, you're going to suffer in your situation regardless, but there is a way you can redeem the unjust situation. And he does call it unjust. This is something that no Roman typically would have called this treatment of a slave. But he's saying it is unjust. and you're going to endure it, and God will repay you for this. God will see, and God will repay you for this. So there is a dignity to what you can do. He's giving them a choice. Even though they have no political freedom, he's saying you still have a kind of spiritual freedom. There is meaning in what you do. God will give it. This temporary suffering that we face, God will give it an eternal glory. Now, that's not to say that Peter is justifying the institution of slavery, because he says, again, he says it is unjust treatment. He's not justifying the institution, but he's trying to give dignity to people who are in a situation that they cannot change. And there was actually a Roman philosopher, a man named Epictetus, who had been a former slave, and he gave similar advice, not based on what God might do, but just based on this idea that you can do something to dignify your situation in a situation that is utterly undignified in so many ways. And I guess maybe the way I would paraphrase this whole section is simply that if you have to suffer, if that's an inevitability, if you cannot remove yourself from the situation, if you're going to have to suffer, it's better to suffer by enduring it with grace, to do it for the Lord, to do it in a way that brings dignity to your own actions, and dignity to the God that we serve, that shows that we do, even despite the unjust situations we might face or terrible situations we might face right now, that we truly do believe in a God who will not abandon us, and a God who will bring us to a better home than this one. In any case, I'm wondering what you see in this passage, and how it might apply in your life.
Yeah, I mean, I think it is just like a tough passage, especially to read in like our context and so I would just encourage people to read and even study this passage to understand the context more. And but I think like something I see is just like the reality of injustice and cruelty, and how that is just a unfortunate reality of life. I think about like even in my own story of my own life. I remember I loved playing basketball, and I worked really hard to play real like to get playing time, but it was always hard for me to come by. And like when I started, I remember my first coach that I had when I started in seventh grade. He said, "Michael, you're quick as a rabbit, clumsy as a clown," and he would say that after like every practice, and I would work really really hard, and I really loved playing basketball. And there's people on my team who like just didn't care, but they got playing time, and my coach seemed to like them more. And I just didn't understand this, and my coach would even say things like, "Michael, have you ever thought about playing hockey?" Or like, "Hey, Michael, have you ever thought about playing football? Michael, have you ever thought about like listing all the sports, one that my school didn't have besides basketball?" And I was like, "I just want to be a basketball player." And I just remember feeling so down and out, like just feeling like, why is this coach like? I understand if you're not going to play me, but like, why are you putting me down in the process? Um, and so but I realized I couldn't really do anything about that, because I even went to him. I talked to my parents. I talked to like our principal, but they were just like, this coach just kept putting me down. And I was like, whatever, I'm just going to work really hard, and I'm going to become a good basketball player, and I'm going to work extra hard and I'm just going to take the jokes, or the what he considered jokes. I'm just going to like absorb it, and I'm not going to let it affect how I play or how I act with my teammates. And this kind of coalesced in my senior year, where I worked really hard, and had a great summer league going into the year. And my coach is like, "Michael, like you keep playing like this, you're probably gonna be starting this year." Day before, I'm just playing pickup, and I go to block someone from behind, and I land on their foot and sprain my ankle 2 weeks before the season, or the day before the season. And I just felt so down, like just it was like unjust, like in just a almost like a cosmic sense of like, I worked so hard for this, and I finally have a coach who isn't putting me down, like who's going to let me play. And now I hurt my ankle the day before the season begins, and I was out for the 2 weeks. And I actually told my coach that I wasn't going to play because I was just that down. But 2 weeks I recovered enough, and I was like, "Hey coach, I know I'm not going to get much playing time this year, but I'd still like to be a part of the team, and if the team's okay with it, can I play?" And he was like, "Sure." He's like, "You're right. You're probably not going to get, like, you've missed 2 weeks of the season." And I knew like there's nothing I could do about that. It felt so unjust. Like my senior year, like I don't get to, I worked really hard, but I decided, I was like, I'm going to be the hardest player in practice. I'm going to encourage my teammates. I'm going to try to make them better, knowing I'm not going to get much playing time, but I can make this team better. And what it kind of coalesced in was, at the end of my senior year, I was awarded a scholarship for good character, essentially, like having the best character on the team. And it was a $2,000 scholarship, which was pretty significant for me, and one I wasn't expecting. And my coach like gave this speech about like how I'd grown and matured, and I just felt like, wow, that was like something, like I felt like there was this injustice for a long time, and when I finally had the opportunity, another injustice, but um, I was able to like have the dignity to like go like to have my attitude be what I was able to control, kind of, and that really just I think like showed me that like you can do there's going to be a lot of situations where you just have no control, but like the things you can control are things like your heart and your attitude, your character, your mindset towards others. And I think in many ways this passage connects to that in some ways.
Yeah, I'm sorry for kind of laughing earlier. I only laugh just because you're an adult now. When I think about it happening to a middle schooler, it's absolutely tragic. It's absolutely horrible.
Yeah.
But now that you're an adult and I know who you are, it is a little funny, maybe. I'm sorry.
No, I look back on it. I've shared it with our middle schoolers, and they're always like, "That's so sad." I was like, "I know." Like it really affected my self-esteem for a long time, but thankfully I had a good community around me, and I guess like a little bit of resilience. And and honestly, this like passages like this in the Bible really helped me along the way too to see like others don't have to control my dignity. Like God gives me worth, and God encourages me to no matter what the circumstances are, to keep trusting him and believing who he says I am.
Yeah, I'm not. So you mentioned the situation of being under a coach. I can think, sometimes people, obviously not to the same level of slavery, people might face this in a work situation where they feel like they absolutely need this job. They can't walk away from this job. I know someone who, getting out of prison, there was just only one job they could get. And it was in some ways a terrible work environment, but there just really was nowhere else that he could work. And it was kind of the only path forward. And so he had to suffer, has had to suffer some of this indignity, but he's worked very hard and earned a place of respect in the job, and managed to move into a position where he's a foreman now. So given him not just given him a dignity in the way that he suffered, but it's given him a true dignity of character in the way that he treats other people. In any case, Michael, I'm wondering if you have any final thoughts and if you'd be willing to close us in prayer.
Yeah, I just had this final thought because I was like talking about how hard I worked and everything, and I was like, where did that come from? And now I think about it, like I just have to like give a shout out to my mom, because my mother was a so I'm half Korean, so my mother was a Korean immigrant. The first one, she was from a family of seven, and she's the only one who moved here. She came over with nothing, and like there are so many situations where she faced just because she was Korean, like she lost a job, she was accused of things, and just a ton of injustice that she had no control over. But she is someone who modeled like okay, that like these injustices are something that I can't do anything about. Like aside from like continue to walk with dignity, continue to work hard, continue to be a person of character, continue to be a godly woman. And I'm like those are the things, those are the qualities I think that I learned and picked up on was seeing my mother, a person of faith, who I know knew this passage and others and faced much more oppressive, much more unjust scenarios. And so I just like that just popped into my mind of like, where did that come from? And I think it came from a legacy of faith and a legacy of suffering for good.
Well, Mother's Day is coming up fairly soon, so we'll have to remember to forward this to her when that day comes.
Yeah.
Michael, would you close us in prayer?
Yes, sure can. Lord, thank you for this word. Thank you for the ways you restore our dignity, the way that you name the realities of the world, even as unjust as they are. But God, that you provide a way for us to be redeemed, for us to know that you are working things for good because you are good. So God, I pray that we would hold on to that. And I pray for those people who are suffering injustices and oppression, that they would be reminded that you are with them, that you love them, and that you are good and working for justice. It's your name we pray, Jesus. Amen.
Amen. Well, thank you, Michael. And, even stopping here, I felt like there's one more thing I have to say. If you are in a situation where you are feeling that someone is treating you not just unfairly, but abusively, and you need help, you need someone, please contact somebody, call someone close to you, let someone know, reach out to us. My email is john@highrock.org. Let someone else know so that they can come alongside you. It's one thing to face suffering in a situation you cannot change, but it's another thing and not recommended to suffer when you actually can change the situation and leave the situation. So I don't want you to hear in this passage that you should accept a situation that can be changed. So in any case, go in peace.